It's strange, isn't it? How one simple email, just a few lines, can shake up an otherwise normal afternoon. That's exactly what happened to me. It was a Tuesday, and I was buried in a frustrating spreadsheet when the notification popped up. Subject line: coffee. The sender? Mr. Harrison. James Harrison, the CEO of Harrison & Co. My boss for over a decade. In all those years, he'd never once invited me to anything remotely casual. Even lunches were rare and usually only involved a client. So this was unexpected. James was a man of routine. I knew his calendar better than my own. He did things by the book, always on schedule, always professional. That's why this email stood out. I opened it. Sarah. It began already unusual. He always used Miss Albright in writing, unless we were mid-conversation. Would you be free to step out for coffee this afternoon? There's something I'd like to discuss, something better suited for outside the office. Let me know. James, my mind started spinning. Was I being let go? That didn't fit. My last performance review had been excellent. A promotion, maybe? But those kinds of discussions usually happened in his office. Not over coffee. Was it about the Henderson account? That had been a thorn in his side for weeks. But even so, why all the mystery? Let me back up a little. I'm Sarah Albright. I'm 47 and have worked as Mr. Harrison's executive assistant since I was 37. I'm single, live a quiet life with my cat Mittens, and tend to a small garden on weekends. James Harrison, on the other hand, is a puzzle. I'd guess he's in his early 60s, but he carries himself with a younger energy. Always sharp in his suits, calm, commanding, a man who never needs to raise his voice to be heard. He's private, reserved. And over the years, we've developed a working rhythm built on trust and efficiency. I knew exactly how he liked his coffee black, 2 sugars. I could sense when his patience was wearing thin, usually marked by a steady tap of his pen. But the man himself, still a mystery. I replied, "Yes, Mr. Harrison, that works for me. I'm free this afternoon, just let me know what time suits you." His response came quickly. "How about 3 p.m? There's a small cafe on Elm Street called the Daily Grind. We can walk." The Daily Grind. Not the modern cafe in our lobby. Not the fancy bistro he used for client lunches. This was a cozy, local spot known for its mismatched chairs and the constant scent of cinnamon rolls. Interesting choice. It felt intentional. The minutes leading up to 3 o'clock dragged. I caught myself reapplying lipstick, straightening my blouse, nervous. Then I couldn't quite explain why. It was just coffee, wasn't it? Still, something felt different right at 2:58 p.m. He appeared at my office door, a rare move. Normally, he'd send a message. "You ready, Sarah?" he asked, offering a smile that wasn't his usual polite one. It softened his whole face, even reaching his eyes. "Yes, Mr. Harrison," I said, grabbing my purse. My heart was doing a slow tap dance. We stepped outside into the cool autumn air. The sun was warm, but the breeze had a crispness to it. The leaves had just started turning those beautiful reds and golds. As we walked, I noticed small things. He nodded kindly at an elderly man fumbling with a newspaper. He paused at a window filled with handmade pottery. It was like seeing a side of him I hadn't known existed. When we got to the Daily Grind, it was exactly how I remembered: warm, inviting, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods. Soft jazz played in the background. We found a quiet table near the window, overlooking a small courtyard garden. "What can I get you, Sarah?" he asked, already sliding off his coat. "A latte, thank you." He walked up to the counter to order, and I watched him interact with the young barista, smiling, easily, relaxed. It was strange seeing him here, in this environment, without the usual weight of the office around him. He returned with our drinks, and placed my latte in front of me carefully. His coffee was black, as always, but I noticed something. No sugar. Had he changed his usual order? Or had I just assumed he still liked it that way? A silly thought, really. But it reminded me of how little I actually knew about the man behind the title. He settled into his seat, wrapping both hands around his mug. A brief silence fell between us, comfortable, but charged. Then he looked at me. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something deeper, something more open than I'd ever seen before. "Sarah," he said, voice softer than usual. "Thanks for meeting me. I appreciate it." "Of course, Mr. Harrison." He took a slow sip of his coffee, then met my gaze again. "I asked you here because I trust you. We've worked together a long time, and I know I can count on your honesty and your discretion." I nodded, unsure where this was going but ready to listen. The air between us had shifted slightly. "What I'm about to share," he continued, "is personal. Very personal. I haven't told anyone at the company. In fact, there are only a few people in my life who even know." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't about a client. Not even close. I leaned in a little, trying to show him that whatever it was, I was here and I was listening. "Mr. Harrison, whatever it is, you have my word, I'm a good listener," he managed. Another small smile, though this one seemed tinged with melancholy. "I know you are. Sarah, that's one of the many reasons I've always valued you." He paused, taking a deep breath as if stealing himself. Aroma of roasted beans and warm milk seemed to intensify the quiet. Chatter around us fading into a distant murmur, the world narrowed to just this small table, this unexpected conversation. And the weight of the impending revelation. "The thing is, Sarah," he said, his gaze unwavering, "my life isn't quite what it appears to be from the outside. There's a part of me, a very significant part that I've kept hidden for a very, very long time." He hesitated, and for a fleeting second I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, fear, perhaps, or maybe just the raw exposure of bearing a long-held secret. "I am not the man Avarian thinks. I am the air," crackled my lax that untouched its delicate foam. Art slowly dissolving, I held his gaze, my mind a blank slate, waiting what could possibly make the powerful composed. James Harrison look, so fragile the anticipation was almost suffocating, a tightening in my chest. He looked down at his coffee cup, tracing the rim with his finger, the picture of a man wrestling with words that were clearly difficulto. Voice. The bustling cafe around us seemed to melt away, and it was just that way of us suspended in this bubble of impending disclosure. He looked up again. His blue eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, now clouded with a depth of emotion I'd never witnessed in him for many years. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying an immense weight, "I've known that my identity, my true self is not male. I am a woman, Sarah. That is the truth I've carried largely alone for most of my life." The words hung in the air, delicate yet powerful, like glass chimes in a sudden breeze. "A woman, Mr. Harrison, my boss, the pillar of corporate strength, was telling me he was a woman." My mind struggled to reconcile the image I had of him, the tailored suits, the deep voice, the confident male presence, with this new startling piece of information. It wasn't a negative reaction, not at all, more like my internal compass spinning wildly, trying to find a new north. I saw the anxiety in his eyes, the plea for understanding, and something within me, a deep well of empathy, I suppose, just opened up. I didn't speak immediately. I simply held his gaze, letting the information settle. The sounds of the cafe slowly seep head back in the clinking of cups, the low murmur of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine. But everything felt different now, sharper, imbued with a new significance. He was waiting, I knew, for my reaction, probably bracing himself for anything from disbelief to discomfort. Finally I found my voice. It came out softer than I intended. "Thank you for telling me, James," I said, consciously using his first name, feeling it was somehow more appropriate now. A small gesture of acknowledgement that must have taken a great deal of courage to share. A visible wave of relief washed over his featureless shoulders, which I hadn't realized was so tense, seemed to drop an inch. Thefia in his eyes receded, replaced by a glimmer of something akin to gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much it means to hear you say that, to not see well, to not see judgment. There's no judgment here, James," I assured him, and I meant it with every fiber of my being, only respect for your honesty. He let out a shaky breath and reached for his coffee cup again. "Hishan, not quite steady I've been. I'm still in the process of figuring out how to navigate this. It is daunting. I'm planning to transition to live authentically, as the woman I am. Her name is Julia, a new name for a person. I thought I knew, yet was only just beginning to understand. Felt right. It felt softer somehow, fitting the vulnerability she was showing Julia. I repeated softly, trying the name out. "It's a beautiful name," a genuine smile, brighter this time, touched her lips. "Thank you, my mother loved that name." She paused, then continued. "The reason I wanted to tell you, Sarah, apart from the fact that I trust you implicitly, is that this will eventually mean changes at work, significant changes, and I'll need support. Understanding, and practically speaking, I'll need your help if you're willing to navigate how this is communicated, how things will shift the weight of her request settled on me. This wasn't just a personal revelation. It was the prelude to a profound transformation that would ripple through the entire company. And she was asking me, Sarah Albright, her executive assistant, to be a part of that journey, a confidant and ally. It was a huge ask, a monumental responsibility. But even as the implications began to dawn on me, I felt a surprising sense of calm, and more than that, a sense of honor that she had chosen to trust me with something so fundamental to her being. "You understand?" I said slowly, my mind already starting to wear with the practicalities, but also deeply moved by the trust she was placing in me. "And yes, Julia, I'm willing to help in any way. You have my full support." The relief on her face was profound. It was as if a great burden had been lifted, or at least shared. "I don't know what I expected, Sarah, but your reaction, it's more than I could have hoped for." She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "There will be a lot to consider. The board, the staff, clients, it's a minefield. But knowing I have at least one person in my corner, someone I've worked with for so long, who knows the company inside and out, it makes a world of difference." We sat in silence for a few moments, the unspoken emotions filling the space between us. The latte had long since gone cool, but I barely noticed the warmth I felt came from a different source, now a connection forged in a moment of raw honesty and vulnerability. It was a strange feeling. The man I knew as Mr. Harrison, the CEO, was still there, but overlaid with this new understanding, this new person, Julie, and in that moment I felt a deeper respect for her than I ever had before. It wasn't just about her position or her business acumen anymore. It was about her courage, her authenticity. When I asked gently, "When were you thinking of making this more public?" Julia sighed, a thoughtful expression on her face. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I've been working with a therapist, a gender specialist, for some time now, and I've started hormone therapy legally. I'm still James, but Julia is emerging. I think perhaps in the next 6 months to a year I want to do it right, with as little disruption and as much dignity as possible for everyone involved, but especially for myself. 6 months to a year. It seemed like a long time, yet also incredibly short for such a monumental change. That sounds like a thoughtful approach, I said. "We can work on a plan, a communication strategy. I can help research policies, ensure we're prepared for questions, for any reactions." "Thank you, Sarah. Your pragmatism is exactly what I need right now, alongside your understanding." She hesitated. "There's more, of course, about my personal life, how this affects my family, or what's left of it. My wife passed away some years ago. As you know, me children are grown, and well, that's another set of conversations I'm navigating, but that's for another time. Perhaps for today, I just needed to tell someone you might understand, or at least listen without prejudice." I nodded. The weight of her journey was immense, far beyond just the workplace. "Whenever you want to talk, Julia, about any of it, and here it felt natural to say it, natural to offer that support." The professional boundaries had shifted irrevocably. And in their place was something far more human, more profound. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Julia spoke a little about her feelings, the decades of suppression, the slow dawning of understanding about her own identity thefia, and now the quiet determination. She didn't go into exhaustive detail, but shared enough for me to grasp the enormity of her internal struggle and the bravery of her decision. I listened aimlessly, occasionally asking a gentle question, offering quiet words of affirmation. I learned that Julia had always felt this way, a persistent quiet, knowing that her external presentation did match her internal reality. She spoke of the loneliness of it, their feeling of being an actor in her own life. As she spoke, I found myself looking at her differently. The sharp, somewhat severe lines of Mr. Harrison's face, he seemed softer. Now the guardedness I'd always sensed in him was still there. Beauty was overlaid with a new openness, a vulnerability that was incredibly endearing. She saw the courage it took to sit here in a public coffee shop and lay bare such a fundamental truth to an employee. You know, Sarah, Julia said, a smile play on her lips. For years I prided myself on being a rational, logical businessman. Emotions were liabilities. And yet here I am, probably the most emotional I've ever been in a professional context. Authenticity isn't a liability, Julia. I replied, and sharing something so important isn't a weakness, it's a strength. She looked at me, her eyes shining. You've given me a great gift today, Sarah. The gift of acceptance. I won't forget it. As we prepared to leave, a sense of quiet camaraderie had settled between us. The initial shock had given way to a feeling of deep respect and a surprising sense of excitement, not for the drama, but for the journey of transformation I was being invited to witness and support. Walking back to the office, the autumn air felt even crisper, the colors of the leaves more vibrant. The world seemed a little different, a little brighter, because a truth had been spoken and a connection had been made back in the familiar sterility of the office building. The usual sounds of keyboards clicking and phones ringing seemed mundane, almost trivial after the depth of the conversation we just had. When we reached my office door, Julia paused. Thank you again, Sarah, for everything. I'll start putting some thoughts together on next steps, and perhaps we can meet again next week more formally to begin some actual planning. That sounds good, Julia. I'll be ready. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. Good. And then she did something completely unexpected. She reached out and briefly, gently squeezed my arm. It was a small gesture, but in the context of our previous relationship, it was monumental, a gesture of trust, of gratitude, of a new unspoken bond. Then she turned and walked towards her own office, her posture a little straighter. I thought her steps a little lighter. I watched her go, then stepped into my own office, my mind reeling, my heart full. The spreadsheet he'd been wrestling with earlier lay forgotten on my desk. It seemed so insignificant now. My world had just tilted on its axis, and somehow it felt more aligned than ever before. I sat down, not to work, but just to process, to let the reality of what had just happened sink in. My boss, James Harrison, was Julia, and she had trusted me with her truth. The afternoon, which had started with such ordinary trepidation, had unfolded into something truly extraordinary. It was the beginning of something new, something challenging, but ultimately something deeply, profoundly human. And it knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was privileged to be a part of it. The path ahead wouldn't be easy for her or for those around her, but the courage she had shown today was a beacon, and I was more than willing to help navigate by its light. This was more than just an office matter. It was about a person's journey to their most authentic self, and I felt a quiet sense of purpose in being able to support her over the next few weeks. Julia and I began our quiet planning. We met in her office, sometimes after hours, the usual professional formality replaced by a more collaborative, almost conspiratorial. She shared more about her personal journey, the cautious steps she was taking with hormone therapy, the small ways she was beginning to express her female identity in her private life, choosing softer fabrics, letting her hair grow a little longer, experimenting with subtle makeup when she was at home. She spoke of the joy and the terror of its liberation, mixed with a profound fear of rejection. I listened, offered practical advice where I could, and mostly just provided a safe space for her to voice her thoughts and fears. My role evolved from executive assistant to something more akin to a strategist and confidant. We researched corporate policies on gender transition. Looking at best practices from other companies, we started drafting communication plans for different stakeholders, the board of directors, senior management, all employees and key clients. Each one required a different approach, a different level of detail, a different sensitivity. The board will be the first major hurdle, Julia said. One evening, staring out of her office window at the city lights twinkling below. They're mostly older, quite traditional. Some of them have known me as James for decades. Will need to frame it carefully, I replied, making notes on my pad. Focus on continuity of leadership, your continued commitment to the company, and the fact that this is a personal journey that will ultimately allow you to be a more effective, authentic leader. I'd also suggested bringing in an expert on diversity and inclusion to speak to the board beforehand to lay some groundwork. Julia liked that idea. It's not just about me, is it? She must. It's about creating a company culture where everyone can be their authentic self. Perhaps this challenge can be a catalyst for positive change throughout Harrison & Co. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late one afternoon, after a particularly grueling day dealing with a difficult client who had been unusually demanding of Mr. Harrison, Julia looked utterly deflated. Sarah, am I completely May? She raised her voice, barely a whisper. I am. I about to destroy everything I've worked my entire life to build my reputation. This company. I pulled up a chair opposite her desk. Julia, I said firmly but gently, what you are doing takes incredible courage. It's not madness, it's honesty. This company is strong because of your leadership, your vision that won't change. Because you are finally living as your true self. Yes, there will be challenges. Some people may not understand or may react poorly. That Harrison & Co. is more than just a name. It's the people who work here, the values we uphold, and integrity, authenticity. Those are powerful values. She looked at me, a flicker of her earlier determination returning to her eyes. You really believe that, don't you? I do, I said, and I meant it, and I believe others will too in time. We also discussed the more personal aspects, how she would begin to present as Julia more publicly. Wardrobe was a significant topic. I haven't bought women's clothescence, well, ever, not for myself to wear out in the world. She confessed, a touch of nervousness in her voice. The idea of walking into a department store is terrifying. Then we'll start small. I suggested online shopping perhaps, or maybe there's a personal shopper service that could help someone discreet and understanding. I even offered to go with her if she liked, though I sensed that was a step she needed to take on her own. With someone from her personal life. She smiled. You think of everything, Sarah. It's my job to anticipate needs. I reminded her gently. The 6 months she had initially estimated began to feel very real. She started subtly changing her appearance at work. Her suits became a little less severely tailored, a little softer in cut. She wore scarves, sometimes in richer colors. Her hair, once always neatly short, was now styled in a slightly longer, softer way. These were small changes, almost imperceptible on their own, but collectively they signaled a shift. I noticed a few colleagues giving her curious glances, but no one said anything. Respect for Mr. Harrison, the CEO, was too ingrained. One of the most significant steps was telling her children she had two, a son and a daughter, both in their late 20s, with families of their own. She agonized over it for weeks. What if they can't accept it? What if they don't want me in their lives or their children's lives? As Julia, they love you, Julia. I tried to reassure her, though I knew this was a deeply personal and unpredictable part of her journey. They love their parent. This doesn't change that fundamental bond. The weekend she chose to tell them, I found myself unusually anxious. I sent her a brief text on Saturday morning, thinking of you, hope it goes well. She replied late on Sunday evening. It was a lot. Shock, tears, confusion, but also love. Questions. So many questions, but they're trying. They're really trying. It's a start, a fragile start, but a start. He felt a wave of relief for her. It was, as she said, a start, and that was a Lanyon could ask for the planning for the corporate announcement intensified. We decided on a phased approach. First, the board of directors in a specially convened meeting, then senior management, followed by an all-staff meeting, and finally carefully worded communications to key clients and stakeholders. Julia decided she wanted Toe present for all of it, to tell her story in her own words as much as possible. The day she was scheduled to meet with the board was fraught with tension. She came into the office looking pale but resolute. She was wearing a charcoal grey trouser suit, impeccably tailored, but with a softer blouse underneath than she might have chosen previously. Her demeanor was calm, but I could see the strain in her eyes. Ready? I asked quietly as she prepared to head to the boardroom. She took a deep breath. As I'll ever be, Sarah. Wish me luck. You don't need luck, Julia. I said you have truth on your side, and you have me right here. If you need anything at all, I'd be waiting just outside the boardroom, ready to provide any documents, any support. She gave me a grateful look, a small nod, and then she walked towards the biggest professional challenge of her life. I watched her go, admiring her courage more than words could say. The fate of Harrison & Co., and more importantly, Julia's future as its leader, hung in the balance. The next few hours would be critical. I settled into a chair outside the boardroom, my own heart pounding, sending every ounce of positive energy. One possessed her way. This was her moment, the crucible. And I could only hope that the men and women inside that room would see the strength, the integrity, and the humanity that I had come to see in Julia Harrison. Wait felt interminable. Every muffled sound from within the boardroom sent my nervous jangling. I tried to focus on some paperwork, but it was impossible. My thoughts were entirely with Julia, imagining the scene inside, the questions, the reactions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 2 hours, their bedroom door opened. Board members began to file out. Their expressions varied. Some looked serious, thoughtful, others were harder to read. I scanned their faces, searching for a clue, any indication of how it had gone. There was no immediate consensus visible. My anxiety ratcheted up another notch. Then Julia emerged. She looked tired, emotionally drained, but there was a faint smile playing on her lips. She caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Relief so potent it almost buckled. My knees fluttered through me. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but it seemed the first and arguably most formidable hurdle had been navigated. Without immediate disaster, she walked over to me, her steps slow but steady. Well, she said, her voice a little hoarse. That was intense. How did it go? I asked, trying to keep my own voice even. Better than I feared, Sarah. Much better. There were a lot of questions, of course, concerns about client reactions, about media, about the stability of the company. She made air quotes around stability, but overall, I think they've listened. I think they understood on some level, or at least they're willing to try. No one stormed out. No one called for my immediate resignation. She gave a wry smile. So small victories, that's more than a small victory, Julia, I said, feeling a genuine warmth spread through me. That's a significant step forward. There are conditions, of course, she continued as we began to walk slowly back towards her office. They want a detailed plan for managing external communications. They want reassurances about the impact on business. They want to be kept informed every step of the way, all reasonable. I suppose under the circumstances we can do all of that, I said confidently. We've already started once back in the sanctuary of her office. She sank into her chair, letting out a long, deep breath. Thank you, Sarah. Knowing you were out there, it felt more than you know. I was glad to be there, I replied. So what's the next immediate step with them? They want to meet again in a week, with our proper communications and transition timeline fully fleshed out. They also suggested, or rather strongly recommended, that I consider taking a short leave of absence during the initial public announcement period to let things settle. It was a delicate question. I can see their perspective, I said slowly. It might reduce some of the initial intensity for you, but it could also be misinterpreted as a lack of confidence, or as you being sidelined. We need to weigh those risks carefully. If you Do take leave, the messaging around it would have to be impeccable, my thoughts. Exactly, she said, let's work on that messaging. Perhaps frame it as a pre-planned period for personal development and strategic planning, aligning with Maya introduction. To the company over the following week, we work tirelessly. We refined the communication strategy, drafted internal memos, prepared facts, and developed a detailed timeline for Julia's transition within the company. We also discussed the leave of absence idea further. Julia ultimately decided against a formal leave. Butte agreed to a period of working more flexibly, perhaps some days. Remeteli following the main announcements, allowing space for adjustment while still being present and leading. The meeting with senior management was next. This group was more diverse in age and background than the board, and many of them had worked closely with James for years. Respecting his leadership, Julia decided to be very direct with them, sharing her personal story with an honesty that was both disarming and compelling. The reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Even emotional civil department heads openly expressed their admiration for her courage and pledged their full backing. There were tears, hugs, things I'd never witnessed in our corporate environment. It was a testament to the respect Julia had earned over the years and to the fundamental decency of her team. The all-staff meeting was the largest and most unpredictable audience. Harrison & Co. employed over 500 people in our main office. We booked the large auditorium. Julia was visibly nervous beforehand, but as she stood on the stage, a hush fell over the room. She spoke without notes, her voice clear and steady. She told her truth simply, eloquently. She spoke of her identity, her journey, and her commitment to the company and its people. She introduced herself as Julia. The silence that followed her speech was profound for a moment. I held my breath, and someone at the front started to clap slowly, then more quickly. The applause spread, growing into a standing ovation. It was a powerful, emotional moment. I saw Julia's shoulders relax, a watery smile grace her lips as she looked out at the sea of faces. Not everyone was applauding, of course. I saw some confused expressions, some whispers, but the overwhelming majority were showing their support. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind. There were articles in the bussiness press, some sensationalist, others surprisingly respectful. We handled media inquiries carefully, sticking to our prepared statements, emphasizing Julia's continued leadership and the company's support internally. There were adjustments, new email addresses, updated decimal files. People began to use Julia and she/her pronouns. There were stumbles, occasional slip-ups with names or pronouns, but generally there was a genuine effort to be respectful. Julia, for her part, handled it all with grace and patience. She was more visible than ever, walking the floor, talking to employees, answering questions. She started dressing in a way that was clearly more comfortable and authentic. For her stylish dresses, smart trouser suits in softer lines, elegant blouses, her whole demeanor seemed change. There was a lightness about her, a new confidence that wasn't there. The fourth formidable CEO was still present, but now infused with a warmth and openness that was incredibly engaging. There were inevitably some negative reactions. A few clients expressed concerns. A couple of long-standing employees, older and more rigid in their views, quietly took early retirement. These were painful moments for Julia. The first new, but she faced them with the same quiet determination she'd shown all along. "We can't win everyone over, Sarah," she said to me one afternoon, "but as long as we act with integrity, and as long as the business remains strong, the critics will have less and less to say." And the business did remain strong. In fact, in some ways it improved. Publicity, though initially challenging, also raised Harrison & Co.'s profile. We were seen as a progressive, inclusive company. It attracted new talent, younger people were drawn to our values. Julia, as a visible transgender CEO, became an unintentional role model for many. My own role continued to evolve. I was no longer just an executive assistant. I was a key advisor, a sounding board, a trusted partner in navigating this new landscape. Our relationship, once strictly professional, had deepened into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. We still had coffee sometimes, not in a clandestine way to share secrets, but as two colleagues, two friends discussing work life and the ongoing journey of Harrison and Co. under the leadership of Julia. Harrison, looking back on that Tuesday afternoon, at the daily grind, I'm still amazed at how one unexpected conversation could change so much. It changed Mr. Harrison into Julia. It changed my job description in ways I could never have imagined, but most importantly, it changed the culture of our company. The Thebata, fostering a new level of honesty and acceptance. Julia's secret, once revealed, didn't lead to the disaster she might have feared. Instead, it became a catalyst for growth, for understanding, and for a more authentic way of doing business. And I was and remain incredibly proud to have played a small part in her incredible journey, a journey that proved that courage and authenticity are among the greatest assets any leader and any human being can possess. It taught me that sometimes the most unexpected revelations can lead to the most profound and positive transformations, not just for one person, but for everyone around them. The world didn't end